All right, and it looks like we are live. Good afternoon. Welcome back to the Money Advantage podcast. Boy, am I glad to be back on this show. Bruce, it's been a little too long for my liking that I have not been able to be on this show, and I'm glad to be here. So, today we're going to be talking about the most risky moves in financial planning, and they're not what you think they are. Bruce, thank you so much for being here. Thanks for holding down the Money Advantage podcast as well for the last 2 weeks. We'll talk about that in a minute, but thanks for being here for this conversation today.
Yeah, it's the more and more feedback I get from, listeners, the more that they just appreciate the honest and open uh way we communicate about topics, and we're just going to continue to do that. Um and it's kind of refreshing because sometimes I think, does anybody really care about this? But more people care than I realize. So yeah, I'm looking forward to having this conversation today also.
So, what we're talking about today is uncovering the most risky moves in financial planning. And what's really interesting is when we hear the word risk, I think the first thing that comes to mind is, well, there's risks of the stock market. There's risk of investing. There's risk of losing money. There's risk of the market swings. There's risk of inflation. There's risk of taxes. But we don't often think about the things that are a little bit more close to home, a little bit more to do with our personality, our way of being, our habits, our way of operating and thinking that can potentially add in a more amount of risk than all of those external factors. And so we're actually talking about that today. Um, Risk can come from the choices that we're making without realizing a long-term impact. And so some of these risks might look like chasing returns to potentially locking money away without having liquidity or relying on assumptions that you are just relying on assumptions of someone else, assumptions of what you think the market is going to do, what you think interest rates are going to do, what you think inflation is going to do, even outsourcing too much control. And this is something that we speak about. Bruce, I'll use your word tout. We tout a lot this idea of control. It can be risky to give up that kind of control. So we're talking today about those kind of risks that really are some of the most risky moves in financial planning and how they erode your financial strength and even not just your ability to enjoy your money today, but also what you have the ability to leave in a lasting legacy past the end of your life as well. So Bruce, let's go ahead and just talk about first, what do people think about when they think of that word risk when it comes to finance or money or financial planning or retirement planning? That risk word, I think it's thrown around a lot with risk assessment, risk analysis. Why do we think of risk the way that we do?
Yeah, so it's very interesting because the word risk um, is a qualitative word. In other words, you're just putting some type of subjective idea of what risk means. And what risk means to me is much different than what risk means to you or the person that's your next door neighbor or your brother or your sister, even in the same family, the word risk means something different. I just had a client last night who he's retiring principal from a middle school here in St. Louis, and he does have a pension, but then he has about a half a million other liquid money, and he said, what should I do with this? And I said, well, first of all, we have to establish your goals and your risk profile. And he said, well, I don't even know what risk is. And so I thought it was really nice that we're talking about this today. So everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, but a lot of people in the financial services industry tries to assess what you feel risk is. And they'll do it by a series of questions, and then they'll sign the answers to those questions as your risk profile. And then they will try to put you into products that will have what they call drawdown. Rachel, the industry now is using the word drawdown instead of you're losing money. Um, Now, in defense, in defense of them, where they're saying when a portfolio goes downward, people say I lost this, but in defense of that, you really haven't lost it because you have not sold anything. So it's just gone down on paper. So what the industry is then saying, so let's don't call it a loss because it's not a loss. We've just drawn down from the original amount of money that you actually put in. So I can see both sides of the argument. I do believe that most people, though, we have people that don't even open up statements because they don't want to see that. Now, when I hear that, that also helps me develop a risk profile. Because if you can't even open up a statement from a financial product, that means that you probably can't stand losing any money on paper.
Or
Now,
admitting that you lost, or being aware that you lost, like somehow, as in your, I'm going to use the word oblivion, but somehow your denial of the loss makes it less risky or less substantial, less concrete, I guess.
or more palatable.
Yeah.
For, uh, so what I try to do is because I'm trying to meet people where they are across the table from me. Is I asked this simple question. I asked them, if the stock market goes up, if we have $100,000 and the market goes up 20%, but you only went up 5%, are you going to feel bad about that more so than if the stock market goes down 20% and you went down 20%, but you could have only gone down 5%? Which one is going to make you more sick? You missed that additional 15%, or it went down an additional 15%. So I'm trying to bring some real life situations in because I tell people all the time, everybody's an aggressive investor until they lose money.
Hmm.
Once they lose money, they're like, "Well, I didn't know this was going to happen." Um, we just recently, Connor and I were just recently talking to one of our clients, and their portfolio had gone up 12%, but the market in general had gone up 20%. And her question to us was, she wasn't accusatory, but she said, I don't understand if the overall market's up 20% and I'm only up 12%. What am I paying you guys for? She goes, I could just put it in the market index funds and the S&P Spider, the overall market. And that's what people generally think about, is they only think about the upside of the market. And then I said, well, I wanted to remind you that you were afraid of the market. So we put you in a portfolio that historically, if the market would have went down 20% this year, you would have only been down 3%. So you can't have it both ways. So you have to accept one or the other. And then she said, oh, okay, now I kind of understand. I don't believe she really understood
Mm.
because once again, I think people want their cake and eat it too. They're always chasing that shiny object. But that's what you have to talk to your inner self about. What am I really trying to assess risk wise? Is the risk of, because people only think about the risk of going down. They don't think about the risk of not making the upside as high as possible. They're both risk.
I feel like Bruce, just related to that exact topic, is that it doesn't help that people who do really well in a particular stock or a particular uh, asset class, or they put money in something and they really make it big and they talk about it, whether it's, I don't know, it's Bitcoin, or it's it's rental real estate, whatever it is, and they do really well, they're going to talk about that win. But you don't often hear people say, hey, but I also, before I won, before I had this gain, I also lost this, and I lost this, and I lost this, and I lost this. And so the narrative that I think we perceive is that somehow everyone else has figured out something that we haven't figured out, and they're winning here and they're winning here, and all we see is the wins, and we don't want to lose out on that because somebody else is getting ahead more than we are. But the challenge is that most of those people have had to go through downturns, or what do you call it, drawdown now. They've
Oh,
gone through some failure moments, and what the highlight reel is showing is the win. And often they have had to overcome some kind of risk in order to get there. And again, I think there's so many different kinds of risk, because you're mentioning risk in the market, but there's also this entrepreneurial risk. I mean, there's this idea of, well, there's some people that really just cannot stomach the idea of putting time and energy and financial resources and your life and your reputation into a thing entrepreneurially, for it to potentially not make it, for it to potentially fail, or to potentially not make money. And you can look at that and say, well, maybe they just don't want to accept that risk. But then you could say, well, is that risk greater than the risk of putting money in the market? It really just depends on looking at what kind of risk you're open to embracing in your life, and what you're willing to be tenacious through in order to get the reward on the other side of that.
yeah. So to a couple people on YouTube, Tiny Homes, Texas, said everyone is happy gambler until they lose. And that's really related to what you were saying. And I joke around all the time, when I talk to somebody that's gone to Las Vegas, and we actually have gambling casinos here in St. Louis,
Oh,
when
wow.
you talk to people that go to these places, you never hear anybody lost money. They either made money or they broke even. And I always find that interesting because they're all filled with these crystal chandeliers wherever you go. And I'm like, the casino is filled with these crystal chandeliers from people that have never lost money. That doesn't really make any sense. But that's because we don't admit to ourselves that we have lost money. And then Rob Brayton, who was a longtime listener to, says everyone has FOMO, fear of missing out, which I think you just commented on, until it's a down market or losses. Um, and then he reminded us of what Buffett's number one rule is: never to lose money.
Never lose money.
Number
Yep.
two is don't ever forget about rule number one.
Yep.
And what there's another risk that a mathematical risk that actuaries have figured out is actually over diversification in the markets actually causes um, more drawdowns, as we're going to say now, because of increase of cost to get in all these particular
Mm.
different. But people say all the time, well, you can mitigate risk by diversification, but too much diversification can also cost a portfolio also. I think the one thing that when people talk about risks that they have to be comfortable with is there's also, you're too young, but there's a band from the 70s called Rush, and their one of their famous songs was, if you, the lyric was, if you choose to not decide, you still have made a choice. And that is what the fear of not doing things also is causing you not to make a decision, but not making that decision is still a choice that can come back to haunt you.
Mm. So true and so good. I mean, Bruce, when I think of risk, I mean, if we just kind of even extrapolate it outside of the financial world for a minute, I mean, you have the risk of, I don't know, slipping and falling on ice, or the risk of driving your car and having an accident, or sliding off the road because of the wintry conditions or something. And I think we're always evaluating risk. We're always saying, okay, well, if I literally avoid every single risk in this world, I won't breathe. I won't live. I will never have a relationship. I'll never ever try something new. I'll never go outside of my comfort zone, because I can't deal with the potential of the unknown, and that unknown can be a risk. And at the same time, we realize, well, we've got to be aware of the risk. And I think this is where in parenting it comes most apparent to me, because you want your kids to be safe. But if you literally wrap them in bubble wrap and duct tape and tell them, sit in the corner, don't breathe, don't touch a single thing, don't make any sound, well, that's not a way to live or enjoy life. And they're going to have some risk, some falls, some bruises, some bumps, some bangs, some things that cause them some heartache in life. And you as the parent then have to watch your kid go through this. And I have a 2.5-year-old right now who's kind of bumbling and, bumping into stuff all the time. And he's always got new black eyes and bumps on his face every single day. And, if we didn't allow the risk of that, then he also would not develop the resilience or the strength or the capacity to continue to advance and grow. And so I think sometimes embracing that risk is necessary, but we also need to, we're all, I guess what I'm saying is we're all always making calculated risks. Is this something we really should avoid 100% just because there's a risk? Or is it something I need to be aware of? I mean, it's the same thing when the 6-year-old is learning to cut with a knife. I want her to understand how to use a knife properly, but I don't want her to chop her fingers off. And so there's a proper way to do something within the bounds of this is a very dangerous tool, but used properly, it can execute this thing, this skill that I want you to learn and adapt to. So I think it's important to recognize that we're always evaluating risk. There's risks in so many different capacities, but I think the thing that we want to focus in on today is that often there's all these external risks and we can see all of those. I think we almost have this maybe it's like rose-colored glasses, looking at ourselves and our own evaluation of our own habits and our disciplines and our ways of doing things, and we look outside at the risk, and it's really easy for us to perceive the risk outside of ourselves, but not even realize that we might potentially, just in our way of doing things, be creating a risk by going with the flow or going through the motions of doing what everyone else is doing, rather than really evaluating the environment that we're in.
Yeah, so I think risk risk is something that I think I'd like to just say to people it's personal. I don't allow somebody, especially a financial professional, to tell you, "Oh, don't worry about that. It's really not that risky." Or you shouldn't feel like that because we've protected you from, this risk because they can't feel exactly what you feel. Okay. And then there's other types of risk. It's like, is it the risk that you're not going to have enough money to pay your bills this month, or that you're not going to have money to pay for your bills the entire year, or you're going to run out of money before you die? And then some people who we deal a lot with this, Rachel, is the risk of not having money to pass along to the next generation, which is very important to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we use this all the time as there's only three places or three things you need to consider when you're putting money somewhere, and that's safety, liquidity, and growth. Those are the three things because you can't get all three of those in one particular place you put your money. And so that's one of the ways I try to help people try to evaluate how they feel about something and the risk. Because if you have lack of liquidity, you're going to want to have something to make up for that. So lack of liquidity, then you would expect something that's going to be a little safer or something that's going to have more growth or a combination of those two. If you have safety, you're going to then say to yourself, because I have safety, what are the other things I'm going to give up? Well, safety generally means you're going to have liquidity. So that means then you're not going to have very much growth. And so then if you go down to the final one, if you want a lot of growth, then you're going to have to give up one of the top two. You're going to give up liquidity or you're going to give up safety. Generally, then, if you give up liquidity, you're going to then have a little bit more safety. If you take growth and you're saying, okay, I'm willing to give up safety, then you're going to have liquidity. So, example, you might get into a stock that shows promise in growth. You're giving up safety, but you could sell the stock tomorrow. So you have that liquidity. But let's get into something else, such as a real estate portfolio that is going to be done in the Southeast where everybody is moving. So you're like, okay, I can the projections I'm going to actually have 18 to 20% year after year growth on this because of rents, and then I'm going to be paying down my debt along the way. But I'm not going to have liquidity because the only way I can get my money out is if I sell it. Okay, so that means if you don't have liquidity, now in this case, you're going to have more safety. Why do you have more safety? Because you're not going to sell the apartment complex unless it's in your best interest. So all these things can be evaluated de depending on safety, liquidity, and growth. You just have to decide which one you want in which particular situation. Right
Which
now,
Bruce, oh, go ahead.
right now, let me just finish this about real estate. Right now, a lot of people are hurting because interest rates spiked very quickly, and people that put the real estate syndications together. Syndication is a conglomerate of a lot of investors that may have gone through the SEC, but the SEC never approves, they never approve that this particular investment is going to make money. They just say all the filing requirements were there. But these syndication people were basing upon their returns on the interest rates that were low for 15 years. They did not put any contingencies on as it went up. And then they had balloon contracts or maybe 7 1 year arms and where it was only locked in for 7 years and then it could float. And they didn't have any contingencies and they were over leveraged. Literally, I almost every week I run into somebody that was in one of these syndications and they've lost 50, 100, $150,000. And they say to me, I thought it was the same way because I just made 50, 100, and $150,000 the last 5 years on one of these syndications. So the moral of that story is just like Rob said about Buffett, all you have to do is lose major money one time and it wipes out all the good you did for the past 5, 10, 15 years. And that is a risk that people forget about. So only investing on something you know and you like and you're comfortable with is one of the things I think that also de-risks things for a person.
100%. And Bruce, I was just gonna kind of put a stamp on what you just said about that safety, liquidity, growth. I think that's such a helpful schematic for somebody to actually make decisions because here's the non-helpful schematic that most people go by. They say, and this is not what we believe, but this is what they say out in the world. Oh, you just take on more risk. That means you're going to get a higher return. And somehow in our mind, we think when it comes to money, more risk equals or necessitates or creates always a higher return. Meaning, well, if I'm just willing to lose more, then of course I'll stand to gain more, and it's going to ultimately end up in my favor. That's not what high risk means. High risk literally means higher potential of loss. So it you could win, you could gain a lot, you could also lose a lot by having more risk. And so I love taking that and almost wiping that off the table. I do not think that that higher risk equals high return is helpful in making any kind of financial decisions. But what is helpful is understanding what the basic attributes of different financial tools are safety, liquidity, and growth, and recognizing that if you gain one, you're giving up some of the other attributes. And so that helps you to really then think through your decisions from a different perspective, where instead of just trusting a professional who says, "Oh, it's okay, you feel like this is risky, just trust us. We got this under control. The market rises and falls. You're going to ultimately end up higher." Instead of having to be sick to your stomach on that ride of this roller coaster of the market doing stuff that you really are not comfortable with, you really can say, well, do I want more safety? And this doesn't necessarily mean across the board in your entire asset base. This doesn't mean I always, with all of my assets, put everything in a safety category and I don't care ever about any growth and I don't care about liquidity. That's not what it means. It means that, Bruce, you're saying there's a particular job of each asset. And if
Purpose
you
of
can,
your money.
yes,
You have to assign a purpose of each bucket of money that you want for, and that bucket is the purpose of that has that purpose. And that's what you have to assign then the safety, liquidity, and growth for that purpose.
which just means we're not saying growth across the board with all of my assets, safety across the board with all of my assets. We're saying this particular asset is going to do safety really well. So let's then maybe take some other assets that's going to do growth really well and have those combined together within your entire financial picture, but recognizing that in a particular asset class or a particular investment, you're going to have trade-offs. I shouldn't say investment because we could be talking about, non-asset based, um, non-market based assets as well. We could be talking about savings accounts. We could be talking about, um, uh,
Insurance products.
yeah, yes, annuities. We could be talking about anything that's fixed. So Bruce, we have kind of focused on this volatility component, but why is that not the only or even biggest part of the risk that most families actually face?
Why is the market volatility not the only one you're talking about?
Yeah, why is it not the most important risk that families face?
Well, I think the most important should be determined by that particular family. That's why questions are so powerful about how they um, they see the world, and we tend to think about risk not on in the present, but what kind of a risk am I taking to get to a retirement date,
Mm.
and then what type of risk am I taking through retirement? Um, I saw a retirement seminar one time say it's kind of like climbing Mount Everest. More people die going down Mount Everest than they do actually going up Mount Everest. And
I did
so,
not know that.
and it makes sense when you think about it because you're exhausted
Mm-hmm.
after the climb up.
Oh, of
And
course.
yeah. And so any peril, you're more likely to, experience something bad on the way down. Well, and the other thing is that in retirement, if you have bad things happening as you prepare for retirement and something bad happens, then you just don't retire. Okay. So that makes sense it's much more once you do retire, now it's not as easy to get back into the workforce for a variety of reasons. Maybe you lost the skills required, or maybe people see, well, I don't want to hire you because it is age discrimination, but as long as they don't say it, it's not age discrimination. They see you and say, oh, this person's probably in their 70s. They're probably only going to work a couple more years. And even if they don't, they plan on working the rest of their life might only be 6 more years. I'd rather hire somebody in their 30s. And so that's the same type of thing is, you know, the the bigger risk is after you retire. Now, I say this to people all the time. The reason why you cannot necessarily use historicals, and yet we have to hang our hat on something is historicals often say, over this particular period of time, 50 years or 100 years, this asset class has done this. However, your retirement years might only be 20 years. You retire at 68, you're in 20 years, you're 88. Well, there are 20-year periods or 10-year periods over those 50 or 100 years that do not perform very well. So to just automatically say, well, don't worry about it because historically, we have ups and downs and you'll be fine. These are risks that people have. So I would say the risk is more um, about how a person views retirement. Is retirement where you literally are not getting any more money and you're really just living on money that you stored away from your younger life? Or is retirement where you just slow down and you're still making money, but you don't have the same you type of time commitment? have you built a business where you can still get some distributions off that business, but you haven't relied on just the market for returns or a bank for returns or an insurance company for returns? What does retirement look like for you? And if retirement doesn't look like completely passive, then you're much more likely to be successful in your retirement for two reasons. One, you're much more comfortable with the money flow. And number two, you're going to stay engaged with society if you maintain some type of active financial responsibility in your cash flow.
Bruce, I think what you're touching on is just so important that sometimes our mindset can have the greatest risk of all. And I think some of the ways that that shows up are thinking that you just have to outsource all of your financial thinking to a professional who probably knows more than you per se, quote unquote, and is in a position to tell you what you should feel comfortable with and not feel comfortable with, which then is outsourcing your thinking. That's a huge risk because if you do not understand the decisions you're making and you don't feel good about the decisions you're making, you're not going to be confident. I think another tremendous risk is being in a position where you're getting rid of control. And this isn't maybe as easy to see, but when you have to um, qualify to get access to your money, or you have to have some kind of gatekeeper that you go through to give you permission, whether it's to get equity out of a house or to get um, money out of a 401k or money out of an IRA or something like that, and it's maybe before retirement time, you're in a position, or now you're after retirement, now you have RMDs and you have the required minimum distribution, which has a required amount of taxation associated with that. And now you're in a position where you've given up control because you don't have a say in how you're going to use that asset, at what time you're going to access it, how you're going to access it, what amount of taxes that you're going to pay. You've given up that control because the cash is in someone else's control. In that case, that has a tremendous amount of risk because now you're not the one who really gets to call the shots. It might be your capital, but it's not in your control. And I think that can be one of the greatest risks of all.
Oh, there's so many. I think stories resonate with people more than anything
Oh,
else.
yes.
So I'll just give you a story. Once again, just yesterday, that teacher that was the principal is retiring, and he has to make a decision whether he's going to take his entire pension in a monthly amount. Now that might seem great. You know, he's going to get X amount of dollars a month, and it's guaranteed by the state of Missouri not to run out during his lifetime. Or he can reduce that amount and then take a lump sum of money. And he was saying to me, which one should I do? And I said, well, it really depends on why you want that lump sum of money. And he said, well, I feel the freedom of just having that money in case I want to do something with it. And I said, well, let me just tell you something about this first. You'll have to roll it from the public school retirement system into an IRA. You're only 55 years old. So it'll be 4.5 years before you have unfettered access, because the United States government says you cannot access an IRA until 59 and a half without penalty. I said, so you don't have control. And he goes, oh, I didn't realize that. He said, so maybe now I'll just keep it in and get the higher number every month. And I said, yeah, but you're giving up control there too, because do you think you're going to spend all that money every month? And he said, no, I don't think I'm going to spend it all. I said, so now you're paying taxes on money that you don't even want. At least if you left it with the system, they're going to lower it and you don't have to pay taxes on that until you take it out. So the systems that you give up control to actually put a lot of restrictions on you as far as how you can access. Now, once again, we're talking about safety, liquidity, and growth again. So his pension is safe We just found out from talking it's not liquid. And does it grow? Well, in this particular case, this pension does grow up to the cost of living, uh, up to where over 25 years, it can go up 80% of his original amount. So in this one, it does grow, but he's given up liquidity in that situation. So all of these things, giving up control. So we had another person. They worked 30 years. You don't see this very often anymore, Rachel, where somebody works 30 plus years for a company.
Oh,
And
sure.
it was a private company, so they got private stock over the years. And just the last 5 years, this company has grown so much, the private stock has actually grown in just 5 years over 100% growth. So
Wow.
now he's going to be able to retire with this private stock, and I we don't have time to talk, explain all this, but it's going to go from common to preferred stock, and according to the company, he will draw 3.5% from that preferred stock, which is going to, in his case, equal to $150,000 a year. He also is going to get Social Security in the tune of about $36,000 a year. So he's got $186,000 a year coming in from these two sources. And he has 8 rental properties that he's getting about 8,000 a month because they have good cash flow because they don't have any debt. So now he's got another 96,000. So he's got well over $250,000 of income coming in. And his income was only about 200,000. So his income's taken care of. But he's got $2 million in his IRA that he doesn't even need. So at age 75, the government's going to come along and say, you've got to start taking out required minimum distributions. And so he's given up that control. Even though he doesn't need it, he's going to have to start taking it out. Now, we did some projections for him in 15 years. He would only have to get about 5% average over those 15 years to double that by $4 million in 15 years. And the first distribution is a little less than 4%. Well, let's just say it's 4% for easy math. Now he's got 4% on $4 million or $160,000 that he has to put on top of the $250,000 and pay the increase in taxes. And by the way, they have 2 boys, and this is where it really gets to be great strategies. The government, from the Secure Act, from the Biden administration, decided that when it passes along to the next generation, they don't get to spread it out over their entire lifetime. They have to take it out over 10 years. So now, let's just say we maintain it for $4 million. Both boys get $2 million, but that means they have to take $200,000 out a year on average, put it on top of their salaries, and pay the taxes on that. So giving up lack of control by these government programs can cause a lot of problems for certain people. And though that's a risk, that's a tax risk that people don't even think about. And as I told him, we are in the lowest tax brackets now. In 15 years, we may actually be in very high tax brackets because of our debt that's going on right now. So there's all kinds of risk out there. It's not just volatility risk.
Which is a significant, the tax risk can be a significant risk, especially when you look into the future or you look ahead at the future, or you don't just think about the taxes in this year, 2025, or next year in 2026, but you literally think ahead to the time frame that required minimum distributions may be required, or that your heirs will be required to then take out this cash within a 10-year period.
Yeah. And so the last kind of topic I'd like to talk about today is how do you minimize a lot of risk? So
Absolutely. I think that's what everyone needs to know.
yeah. So one of the things we like to talk about is there's risk during your lifetime, but then there's risk of your generational wealth to the next generation, to the next generation, to the next generation. And one of the ways we try to minimize all these different risks is if you set up properly designed whole life insurance products on each generation and then borrow against that cash value to do some of this investing, whether it's in yourself, whether it's in a business that you want to start, whether it's in a traditional investment. And if any one of those don't pan out and you've borrowed against those policies, then when you graduate from this earth, the death benefit actually replaces all that risk, that poor risk that you took. And the next generation then can use those to leverage for their policies. And now they've learned, hopefully, from you about the different risks that they've taken. So they've gotten some intellectual risks that they've learned, but they've
Or
also,
reduce the intellectual risk. Yeah.
yeah, so they've learned that, but now they've also, the monetary risk was replaced. So now they
Hmm.
can just rinse and repeat and mitigate that risk. They can do the same thing. Okay, I'm going to borrow against, now I use the death benefit to actually fund and capitalize my policies. I'm going to borrow against that to borrow to do a business. I'm going to borrow against it to do a traditional investment. I'm going to borrow against it to eliminate financing in my life. And if any of that goes bad when they graduate from this earth, then their death benefit then protects the generational wealth from the next to the next generation and so on and so forth. So it's so having well-designed whole life insurance products, not universal life, but whole life insurance products because they have guarantees and they endow is a way to mitigate risk. I on a on just this is a little bit of a side track, but not a big side track. I am amazed. I know a guy from our country club that unexpectedly passed away at age 55,
Mm.
and he left four kids and a wife. And the thing that I was reading his obituary this morning, and they set up a GoFundMe for his children's college expenses. So what did that say to me right away? The
No
guy
life
had no life
insurance.
insurance.
Yeah.
Yeah. And his 401k, if he had that traditional, goes to the wife, but she's a little younger. Well, he was 55. He wasn't even eligible to take that.
Hmm.
So it's just a mess. Whole life insurance actually helps with all mitigate all these different risks.
I think, I mean, Bruce, I know that you and I are in this industry and in this space, and maybe that's why it can be so easy to see the value of life insurance. It uh, surprises me as well how many people don't see that value, and I think often it can just be seen as an expense, or it can be seen as a nice to have, or, you know, I'll get around to it at some point. I don't really want to handle the cost of that. And I mean, you and I both know my story as I had a near-death experience about 6.5 years ago. We were already in the life insurance space, already had a lot of life insurance, but that made us realize that life isn't guaranteed. And at some point, I want the best possible outcome for my kids and my family at whatever point that is. And hopefully it's 120 years old for everybody we talk to. And for us, for you, me, Bruce, even your dad, hopefully he's got another, I don't, what is that, 35 years left, 34 years if he's 86. Um, but looking at the ability for life insurance to literally create the capital to not only take care of all the things you were going to take care of during your lifetime, but all the things that you could have done with the money that was coming in. There's just so much potential for it. And I think really somebody who is willing to delay gratification, plan for the future, make wise financial moves that might not feel comfortable, or they might not even feel like the most immediate need. But if they can think forward to the future, there's just so many challenges, so many problems, so much heartache that can be overcome by having that life insurance tool. And, another risk that it mitigates, and again, this is not the main risk even, but we've had Dr. Wade Pfau on the show, and he talks about the sequence of returns risk, meaning when you have the drawdown, when you have the drawdown of your investment portfolio over here while you're taking out distributions to fund your income, and now the market is down and it's even cutting into your principal even more and causing the significant reduction of this nest egg that you have. If you had this other asset over here that was safe and didn't have the same kind of volatility that you could draw from in that case while this drawdown is happening over in your um, investment portfolio, that mitigates the returns risk of this investment portfolio crashing faster than necessary because you're taking off the stream of income plus the market is having a upheaval. And so life insurance also provides a tremendous benefit when it's whole life insurance, tremendous benefit during your lifetime for minimizing the challenges with an entire portfolio that is market based. It also allows you to have capital that you can access. So the liquidity factor is really high when you have properly designed whole life insurance because you can access the cash value. So this has been just a really profound conversation. I think when you ask the question, Bruce, about would you rather not lose out on a potential return or not lose as much in a down market, I'm tempted always to say, I'd rather, capitalize on that full return at the top. And I'm thankful my husband, Lucas, he would very much not want to lose any money. And I think partially he's influenced me over the years, but also if I'm honest, before I met him, I was not a spender. I saved everything. I didn't spend money. I was definitely the keep all the money and and then I would spend it all on like sending my sister on a missions trip or something like that after saving up for 2 years. But it's really interesting to look at that. And I think we would all be tempted to say, you know what, I don't want to lose out on any potential gain. But the real truth is, if you can avoid losing money, you can make those consistent, positive, small incremental gains that can add up to a lifetime of a lot greater success. And so I think that's one of the reasons why I am so attracted to life insurance and why we use it. I'm not just attracted to it, I'm personally using it. We have been for years and years, and we talk about this all the time because it does handle that safety and liquidity component really well. And it's not going to grow the same way with a comparable rate of return to putting it in some kind of a high return investment or something, but it does have growth that you can count on with interest and then with dividends as well. And so that is a beautiful connection of all of those components. The safety and liquidity are profound, and it's better growth than any other safe and liquid asset that I've seen. All right, so let's go ahead and wrap up there. If you have questions on how to minimize risk in your financial life, Bruce, I know that you've said before that hearing people all in the challenge of 2008, hearing people losing money with all the different downturns, the Great Recession, we've had clients who haven't lost money, and that is really really profound. That relates to this whole conversation about risk. And so if you are wanting to be in a position that is less risky, that not only are you looking for less market risk, less tax risk, less inflation risk, but you're looking for less risk of just trusting someone else to make decisions for you. You're looking for less risk of outsourcing financial thinking or decision making. You're looking for less risk of being out of control and you want more capital in your control. We can help you with that. And so you can book a call with our advisor team at themoneyadvantage.com. We'd love to walk you through how you, in your situation with your life story, your background, your assets, your income, your future plans, your future assets, your desires for the future, how we can look at all of that and help you come up with the best plan that's going to put you in the best position of control so you can thrive. And maybe that does look like different kind of risk than somebody else would take. We can work with whatever your desires and your goals are. Bruce, anything else that you want to share before we close up here?
No, I think the risk is, as I said about the song lyric, the biggest risk is not making a decision.
Hmm.
Because when you don't make a decision, you still have made a choice then to let all the other extraneous things decide for you. At least if you make a decision, you've gained the knowledge on the educational process of making that decision. But as I tell everybody, every decision is based upon the information at the time you have made that decision. If you get additional information, now you might make a different decision or pivot in a different direction. But you can't pivot if you don't make any decision at all.
That's so true. And um, you you cannot foresee the future. You can't possibly make the best decisions that the 40-year-old, senior version of yourself than you are today would have made. You can't know the future, but you can put yourself in the best position to accept the widest range of potential outcomes and be able to be in the best position regardless of what happens externally. So we can help you do that. In closing, thanks for being with us on the show today. Remember, success leaves clues. So model the successful few, not the crowd, and build a life and business you love. We'll see you next time.